Yes, that's a pretty good stab at what comes next, but anyone who tells you they know definitively is lying, let me tell you, because there's so much up in the air right now. Well, with me to discuss what lies ahead in the coming days is Sonia Sodha, Chief Leader Writer at The Observer, and the political commentator and former Conservative advisor Jo-Anne Nadler. Welcome to you both. What's going on up the road at Downing Street tonight? What are they talking about?
Well, I mean, I don't think they'll be too surprised about what's happened today, although obviously the Prime Minister was publicly very, very confident about being able to get his vote through today. But however, I think it was always very much on a knife edge. Perhaps the way in which it was scuppered today wasn't quite what they might have anticipated 2 or 3 days ago. But I'm sure they will have some alternative plans. Probably, as I think was just discussed with the political correspondent, a hope that the EU won't respond in the short term to any letter that comes from Number 10 or from wherever it comes from within the government, giving all the emphasis now on, I think, what happens in the House on Tuesday.
Labour have a decision to make because there's the small matter of the Queen's speech. The legislative agenda that the government put down last week.
Faded into the background.
Where is that? Yes.
Today. Well, I think the decision that Labour have got to make is, so first of all, the big kind of decision point and the big challenge for Boris Johnson is he's going to try, we think, to bring back a very similar motion to that was put today on Monday and see if he can get that.
Can he do that? Because
they
didn't vote on it today, did they?
There's a big question about that because it did get amended, but that's going to be up to the Speaker to decide.
Right.
And I think we all have to wait and see whether Bercow allows that.
Indicated that he isn't going to, though.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And then I think that does, the fact that MPs did vote for Letwin's amendment, what they've done is that they've ensured that there can be proper parliamentary scrutiny of what is going to be a very complex piece of legislation. So I think they did absolutely the right thing. They've got a bit of breathing space. And now I think the question for Labour is, are they going to make a counter move? Are they going to put a vote of no confidence, table a vote of no confidence in the government? And I think it's an open question about whether they have the numbers to get that through. But I think this is a big problem for Boris Johnson. I think unless he can bring another kind of vague motion to the Commons, I think we're going to go next week into seeing some of the legislation being brought forward for his deal. And I think as soon as MPs start to see some of the detail, that's where this coalition that he hopes to build starts to break down, because he's trying to get Labour MPs on board at the same time as hard-right Conservative MPs, and he's basically saying contradictory things to both of those sets of MPs, and that's going to reveal itself this week.
You were shaking your head when you said, when Sonia was saying it's going to need a lot of time.
Well, I was shaking my head at the suggestion that this was a good thing that's happened today, because I really think it's a terrible thing, and I don't think that MPs voted this way today in order really to put the bill through proper scrutiny. I think it was essentially just an effort to kick Brexit into the long grass yet again. But that said, where I do agree with you is that the longer that the procession of the votes goes on this, the more likely it is that it becomes more difficult for Labour MPs to vote for it. And that has always been, I mean, no doubt, I think Boris Johnson has done an excellent job in coming back with a deal that can unite the Conservative Party. But the cost of uniting the Conservative Party is that it's more difficult to bring on board wavering Labour MPs. And, unexpectedly, the other cost has been the loss of the DUP.
It strikes me, I mean, from both sides, it is such a critical piece of legislation, this. The Conservatives don't have the numbers to get what they want. And, of course, really, you should have a government in place with a majority to push it through. So should we be having the withdrawal agreement bill before we've had a general election?
Well, I think the withdrawal agreement bill either has to go to a referendum or to a general election. We need a democratic exercise. Boris Johnson doesn't really, I think, have the numbers to get it through, and I think that's what we're going to see over the next week. And essentially, his strategy today was to try and strong-arm MPs into voting for this bill by essentially, getting it through, not having to ask for an extension extension, and then all of a sudden he's got this no-deal cliff edge on the 31st of October, and he can say to MPs, unless you vote for my deal, doesn't matter if you don't like it, unless you vote for my deal, we're going to be crashing out without a deal. So I think it was quite disgraceful what happened in the Commons today, what he tried to do. A huge piece, this is the most significant decision the country is making in decades, and Boris Johnson tried to railroad it through Parliament without adequate scrutiny, with just a few hours of debate.
But
really
some people would say, well, there have been, 2 SO24 motions where they've been railroaded through in a day. So we had the
those were 2-page bills.
Yes, I appreciate that.
A 585-page legal framework that was published this morning. MPs would not have had the chance to read that and scrutinise that in detail before voting.
No, you're absolutely right about the difference in the
quite a lot of it, about 75% of it, has been taken from the May deal. So,
but I do
the point I was going to make, though,
was
was that they could have put that through today, that motion, and this is the point Conservative MPs like Steve Baker have been making. And then if you were fearful of a no deal, the other side of it, they could have taken the agenda back, as they've done already twice in the House of Commons.
But I think there's so much uncertainty at the moment that I think MPs were absolutely right to say we need that breathing space. We can't have this cliff edge hanging over us while we consider this incredibly complex legislation. And there are two big problems with this deal that Boris Johnson has negotiated. First of all, hugely significant new development, a border down the Irish Sea. That is not something that people were told was going to happen in the 2016 referendum. It puts the union at risk. It increases the risk of Irish reunification. It increases the risk of Scottish independence. And then the second big thing is the economic hit that this deal would have on the country. And again, that is not what people were told in 2016.
Can you decide those things in 2 weeks?
Well, I'm just not sure that I see it in those terms, because in a sense, what people voted for in 2016 was an aspiration to leave the European Union. And I think most of them voted for it knowing that that would have to be enacted in a certain way. And it was down to MPs to then to decide on, to get the legislation in place to decide on a deal. And I mean, we've spent 3 years now going over and over and over this. And what it comes down to is that it's virtually impossible, because the country is so divided, to find a deal that can bring everybody together. If you move in one direction in the House, you move a certain set of MPs. If you move in the other direction, you lose a different set of MPs. This seems to me to be the most likely deal to actually get Brexit done. Now, the likelihood is, it seems to me, that if Brexit doesn't get done in the short term, it might just not get done at all. And I think that is the real agenda of a lot of the MPs and a lot of the people that were protesting today. Now, they're entitled to that opinion. Of course they are. It's their prerogative. But I think that, there's an awful lot of language being thrown around about Boris Johnson being a liar, about a number of Brexiteers being dishonest, whereas I feel that there's a subtext to a lot of what we're hearing from the Remain coalition that also isn't completely honest, because really what they want to do is just to stop Brexit.
Just finally, it's a very good point, that, because the Ben Act said you've got to come back with a deal by the 19th of October. He came back with a deal, and the feeling among some on the Conservative benches is that, again, those who don't really want Brexit moved the goalposts.
No, what the Ben Act said was that Parliament has to pass a deal in order for Boris Johnson to not have to ask an extension. Boris Johnson brought a deal to the House of Commons. MPs feel like they weren't given enough time to scrutinise it. At the end of the day, this deal was always available. The EU made an offer of a Northern Ireland-only backstop quite early on in the process that Theresa May rejected. If this is what Boris Johnson wanted to do, he could have done it weeks ago and given MPs much longer to debate and discuss the implications of separating Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK in regulatory terms. He left it to the last possible minute because he wanted to try and railroad this through in just a few hours in Parliament. It's evading parliamentary scrutiny, it's not on, and that's why MPs stopped it from happening today.
Final thought, we heard from Theresa May today, the first time she's taken to her feet in the House of Commons.
And what we heard, actually, from the Conservative benches was quite an astonishing selection of people coming together. I mean, Steve Baker on the one hand, Theresa May on the other, Alistair Burt. So, I mean, I still think that there is potentially, if this can go to a vote on Tuesday, I believe there are 6 or 7 former Conservative MPs who voted for the amendment today, who, had there not been an amendment, would have voted for the deal. So, I mean,
the difference was 16 today, so if they moved 8, then,
yes, exactly.
then maybe it goes through. It's a fascinating discussion. Thank you both for coming on a very cold Saturday evening. It's very good of you to be with us. I enjoyed that. Thank you very much. Jo-Anne Nadler there and Sonia Sodha from The Observer. Well,